Now we're going to put in a lap zipper in a curved seam. So you're going to use the same pattern piece we use for the slot zipper, but this time we're going to apply the zipper in the curved seam. So I marked the seam just like I did before, so the stop will be 3/8 inch below the top of the cut edge of the skirt. And I marked where to stitch to. So I stitched up my 5/8 inch seam and I pressed open 5/8 inch on both sides. The one thing I've done differently here, and you'll see I've created a little dashed line on this side of the seam allowance. And the reason is that we're going to pull that back just a hair, somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 until you can see that stitching. Once you've made this technique and made this zipper, you won't need to necessarily do this, but I do this just for teaching purposes, just to show you how we're just going to set that back ever so slightly. Okay, so we've pressed this up, we've marked that, and we've marked a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the lap side of the zipper. So just as before, we're going to take the stop of the zipper and put it just below the 3/8 inch, letting that seam back just ever so slightly. But this time, we want that seam right smack next to the zipper teeth. All right. So what we want to do is get right in here, sink our needle down so it will hold our skirt in place while we get everything else adjusted. You know, when you're sewing without pins or basting, you really do need to remember that needle and foot can be your third hand. They really come in handy, and it takes a lot less time to use than putting in and taking out pins. So we're going to let this back, unzip our zipper, and we're going to stitch right next to the zipper teeth. All right, here we go. Just keep that let back. Remember, you see, I still have my thumb under, my fingers on top, so that I'm holding on to that zipper, because even though that zipper tape is pretty stiff, it still could be pulled through a little bit faster than the skirt, and that will make a very wonky zipper for sure. So when we get down here to the area that, the end of the zipper, we'll stop with the needle down, we'll zip up the zipper, and now, watch carefully, we're going to take the other side of the zipper, the skirt, fold it back, so we're still letting out that same amount of seam allowance. And what we want to do now is stitch. You see here is the opening. I want to stitch 2 to 3 stitches past that opening. So I'm going to stitch down to about here. Okay? So we'll go ahead, hanging on to everything as we should, and we'll just stitch right on down until we're past that opening. That ought to do it. Now let's see. Now take the other side of the skirt and put it back where you got it from. So it's going to be up here. All right. Now you should have a big bump like that. If you don't have a bump, you didn't go far enough past the opening. You have to go past the opening to cause this bump. All right, now, all we're going to do is we're going to raise the needle to its highest position and then lift the foot up and smooth out the skirt without moving it. Do not move it, because what we want to do is we want to sink that needle back into that seam, just like that. Okay? Are you with me? So back in that seam. Now turn at a 90-degree angle and come over to the 3/8 inch stitching line that I've marked. We'll just stitch straight over. Now, you can see, because this is in a curved seam, and not every lap zipper is going to go into a curved seam, but this way I'm able to show you the most difficult way to put a lap zipper in, and so putting it in a straight seam will be a cinch. All right, so we can see that this is what we want. We want this folded edge to cover up this side of the zipper, or this stitching on the zipper, and it does quite nicely to about here. So not to worry, we'll just stitch up about that far on our stitching line. Then we'll just keep easing it over, and we'll stitch a little further. And again, a little further. And now when we get up here, we're getting very close to this zipper head, which will cause us troubles if we're not careful. So when we get up close enough, we're going to want to hang on to this and unzip the zipper. Now just finish stitching right on up. Now what you're going to have is a beautiful lap zipper. Cut those tops of the zipper off. And now what you're going to see, once that waistband's on, it'll pull over top of that head. And the idea of a lap zipper is that you can't see the zipper. And now you can see that it's actually contoured to the curve of the hip. So this is a zipper that would be put in the hip side of a skirt. All right? Looks pretty good. Now we're going to put a waistband on this one. But this is a different type of waistband. This is a waistband you don't want top stitching on. And I'm going to show you a little alternative to what's often called stitch in the ditch. So we're going to put the waistband on, but this time we're going to sew it on the right side first. And this we'll call this the underlap, and the underlap sticks out quite a bit from the edge of the zipper, because that's the part that underlaps, and then when the zipper is connected and your waistband overlaps ever so slightly. Okay, so we're going to stitch this, but we'll put the interfacing side against the right side of the skirt because we know we want the interface side to face the public. And we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but first let's switch back to our regular straight stitch foot. It's just more accurate than a single toe foot for seams. And tighten that up. Okay. All right. So again, interface side to the right side, and just for exercise purposes, it doesn't matter how far you have this over, an inch, 1.5 inches, it doesn't matter. Just, it's just an exercise. When you have an actual pattern, obviously you're going to have specific notches and things that will indicate how far that's supposed to, that's been drafted to stick out there. So again, thumb under, fingers on top. Now I told you in the beginning I'd keep reminding you of that, and I'm true to my word. It's the most important part of the process, and if you don't remember that, the rest of it's not going to work. All right, so we've stitched that, and now we're going to do our burrito. So again, we'll take it with the waistband in your hand. This is the easiest way to remember how to do this. So if I have the waistband in my hand and then I fold the skirt up out of the way because I know I'm going to be stitching here. This time I'm not going to be stitching here. I'm going to be way out here, so I'm not as concerned here. And so this side is a little bit easier, but I'm still going to turn it over so I can stitch from the side that has the previous stitching on it. Get a nice crisp fold there. Be very accurate. Take your time. We'll go with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And back into the folded corner as before. And we want to come down here, we want to stitch across. And again, I'm going to remind you, we want to stitch on top of this previous stitching or just above it so that it doesn't show when we turn this right side out. And that's all there is to that. So we'll just stitch straight across here. Come down again. I know some people like to come down as far as they can. They want to kind of make a game out of figuring out how far can they come down. I really don't think it's necessary, but you know, you do what feels good. All right, so we've stitched that across, and I think we've landed on that previous stitching pretty well. And again, we're going to cut this corner, and again, we're not going to cut the folded corner because we need that in the seam allowance for the top stitching, or in this case it's not a top stitching, but what it'll do is it'll help to reinforce that corner so it sits up flat and nice. All right, let's pull the filling out of our burrito, see how we did. Okay, and remember the pointers about using these point turners, not to push hard with the point turner, rather move the fabric down over the point turner. And be very careful so you don't bunch up that seam allowance in there. You want it to lay as flat as possible, even if you're not top stitching it. And then you'll press it in place. Okay, now one thing that you need to do before you do anything else, and that is right here where we stop stitching, we're going to clip the waistband to the stitching. Just the waistband, just the seam allowance. You can do this before you turn it as well. It's probably better. However, I can't tell you why, but I never remember to clip it until I get it turned. And I think maybe I'm just in a big hurry to get it turned. So we're going to clip that all the way to that stitching line. And here's why. We're going to press this seam allowance up here. And this particular waistband that we call our dressier waistband, this is what you'd put in like a wool skirt. And if you're using the wool for the waistband as well, it's bulky. And you want to take some of that bulk down without trimming the seam allowance down to nothing. So by doing this, it allows us to press this seam up here, but instead of folding this one under and adding another layer, we're able to lay this one down flat. So we have less bulk in here. And now all we need to do, once we get that all pressed and nice and flat, we just come over to the other side and we stitch in the ditch. Now many of you may already be familiar with stitch in the ditch, but in case you're not, it means you're stitching in the ditch. And this is the ditch right here. Right where the two pieces of fabric meet, where the waistband meets the skirt. That seam is the ditch. So again, keep this nice and flat under here. And of course, if you had a full skirt, you'd be going all the way around the skirt. But the key here is you want to get right in that ditch. And because I'm using contrasting thread, most likely you're going to be able to see it. But when you're using the thread that matches your fashion fabric, you'll never see this. Now you might ask, what about this raw edge here? Is it going to fray? Yes, it may fray. So this is one time I'm going to tell you that you can use the salvage of the fabric. Now, you may be like, what is she, crazy? I was always told never use the salvage, always cut it off, always throw it away. In most cases, in a lot of fabrics, the salvage is okay, but there are many times where it's stretched out of shape, it's just not nice. And you can tell just by looking at it. So if you've got a nice, clean, flat salvage that doesn't ripple and isn't out of shape and stays nice and straight, you could use it for a waistband like this. And then you have no worries whatsoever. You just stitch in the ditch and away you go. Otherwise, you're going to want to either bind it or finish it in some way. I'm not real big on just having a plain old serger finish, but that also works. And if the thread matches the fabric, that's fine. It won't show on the right side anyway. So there we have stitched in the ditch. You can barely see it. And again, if you had matching thread, you wouldn't see it at all. And then we have the waistband, and let me show you, of course, there'd be a waistband on this side, but this side would be the shorter one, and it would come right here, and this would allow us a little adjustment for the waist to fit. And then on this side, you see, we have this edge laid down, and it's stitched right in place, and it'll stay there. So there you have your lap zipper in a curved seam and the dressier waistband.